Welcome to Buckets. My name's Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network, joining you for yet another NBA Finals preview. And I want to bring on a guest for this one as we get closer and closer to the tip of Game 1. I'm very excited to be joined by I'm going to go ahead and call you a friend, Ken. I've done the show
Thanks,
enough
buddy.
with you.
Appreciate
I've done
that.
enough.
Yeah.
His name's Ken Barkley. He's Lockie Lockerson on Twitter. He is the co-host of You Better You Bet, which is a phenomenal show. Look it up, download the podcast, check it out on the Odyssey app. I'm on there every Wednesday, usually throughout the NBA season. It's my favorite show to do every week. It is the best show for breaking down sports betting across everything. Ken is one of the sharpest people I have ever come across. He loves NBA, so I want to have him on. Yep. Ken Barkley, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks. That was a great introduction. When we have you on You Better You Bet, I feel like we generally really flatter your ego and pump you up a lot. That was a close second. That was compelling. It's good. I know we haven't been on this before, but psyched to talk about the finals. It's weird that kind of 2 months later, playoffs took forever. Everyone was down on the NBA playoffs. I actually think we have a chance for pretty memorable finals that could be pretty awesome. I turned the corner. I think I'm back in. I was out for a little bit on NBA and NBA playoffs, so now I think these couple days off, getting set for Celtics and Warriors. I think I'm back in. I don't know about you.
I think so much of it was just the heat. I think that was the most of it. It was just
get Miami out. See you later.
The heat really drug on everybody, and it was really difficult. And honestly, it was a tough series for me just because I kept trying to fight the perception that Boston, that everyone was so tired of Miami. I think it was feeding into Miami will just get beat. And I was like, well, that's not really the case. They'll probably drag it out because
no, they're actually quite good. They're actually very good at basketball, which is part of the reason they made it to this point. Right. Yeah.
But these two teams are not annoying. And that's the good news. So we'll talk about we'll start with the general series, talk about any props that you like, finals MVP, and then we'll talk about game 1. So I will tell you, I went on. We did the Big Buckets preview on Monday on Memorial Day with Brandon Anderson and Joe. Is that
what it's called? The Big Buckets preview. That's a good name.
The Big Buckets. I should just I need to brand
BBP?
that. The Big Buckets. Yeah, if I'm Ken, I'm definitely gonna turn it into an acronym. If I'm Nick, rather. So, but I started. My inclination when I thought about the idea of a Celtics Warriors finals was Eileen Celtics.
Okay.
And then I did the research, and then it actually came about that there was gonna be these two, and I was like, maybe Warriors. And then I did the research, and I came to Celtics in 6. Then yesterday I did the favorites with Simon Hunter and Chris Raybon, who's been on an absolute heater, and they were both on Warriors, and we're like, really don't see how you can be on Celtics. And I know all the basketball side stuff.
Okay,
I'm a little shook. I still think the value is on Boston because I think it's close enough to where you can get a plus number. I've got Celtics -1.5 at plus 200. That's my best bet for the series based off of the value. But if you've been listening to the show at all, I'm going to bet this multiple times from multiple angles and probably walk away with a small profit betting all sides of this because that's how I approach things. When you have looked at this series, what was your inclination? What was your immediate impulse when we were going to get Celtics Warriors after Game 7?
My immediate impulse was that I thought the Warriors were going to win in probably what would be a long series. That was just my first, not what I bet, not what I took to the market, but just I kind of thought this was going to be the series for a while. And my thought process was basically, all right, full strength. Well, let me ask you this question, because I actually think this series is fascinating in this way. If both teams were fully healthy, full strength, and this rest schedule for the finals, who do you think is the better team?
It's funny you bring that up because I was going to talk about this because I think it's
Boston.
Fascinating one.
Boston is the better team. If it's full health, full strength, then you knew that.
Well, that's what all of the numbers say, right? Because over the last 6 months,
that's not what Matt says. The numbers say this, but Matt says.
Well, here's why it's interesting, right? Is over the last 6 months of play, you cannot come to any other conclusion than Boston. That's why all of the models that we've seen, Ra over at the Ringer, his model says Boston. The numbers I have for regular season and playoffs, they say Boston should be favored.
538, Boston 99.9% to win the title.
Right. It's Boston. My problem is I think that Golden State's season was so jacked in terms of losing Draymond early, and then as soon as Draymond gets back, they lose Steph, and not having Clay until January, that I don't think we have a clear picture of who Golden State is.
That's fair.
Especially when we look at and honestly, their success hides it in the playoffs too, because they roll through Denver. They get past Memphis without Ja. So people are like, well, Memphis was without Ja.
Right.
And then they roll through Dallas. And so it's like, well, it's a small sample, and Memphis was without Ja, and Denver was without so-and-so. And yeah, I kind of look at this and I go, okay, so Boston goes 7 games twice. Golden State goes 5 games in the first and third round. And like, I knew Memphis was going to be a tough matchup. Like, I came on your show and talked about it. I was like, this is going to go, like, Memphis has a real chance here. So I'm not surprised at that, because I think Memphis, one of it kind of gets into, if you want to judge it based off of playoff performance, I kind of wind up being like, do you think Memphis was a better team than the Heat? Because if you do,
okay, that's a very weird cross comparison, but all right, that's interesting. Okay.
It's like if you think that Memphis was a better team fully healthy in the early part of the series than the Heat or the Bucks without Chris Middleton,
right,
then I kind of like wind up coming back around to Golden State. But the overall numbers, that's why I'm trying to stay true to Boston, is because like the overall body of work just says like, look, regardless of context, Boston's been the better team. What are your thoughts?
I think something I've heard from a lot of people is similar to that argument. Like the path each team has taken to this point, does that tell us something about who the better team is at this point? I think one thing I like about this finals the most is that I don't think there's anything about the previous series that necessarily like give us a lean one way or another about which of these teams is better. Each one kind of presents a unique, much more challenging obstacle than all of the previous opponents that both teams have played. So for Golden State, that's like really easy to see. I mean, Denver, and I know you're a Denver guy, but like Denver, right? And I don't even have to say anything else. Denver. Memphis, and Ja gets hurt, and game 1's on a knife edge too. So like, okay, like kind of got a little bit of a break there. And we'll do the Celtics in a second for any Warriors fan that's like screaming at their television or at their computer, however you're watching this. And then Dallas, who presents some obstacles, but like had never been that far before. This collection of players has never achieved this much before, and got like white hot to beat Phoenix. And I still don't really understand what happened to Phoenix. I mean, I kind of do, but Phoenix was probably the best regular season team. So the path is like, all right, you could see how Boston, with potentially an all-time defense, presents like a way bigger challenge to Golden State than what they've seen so far. And for Boston, it's pretty easy to see the same thing. Brooklyn looks amazing, but they're really poorly coached and they might not stay together much longer. And there were all kinds, series was rife with problems from the Brooklyn end. Milwaukee has no Middleton. Otherwise, that's probably their formidable challenger, like even more than it already was. The series obviously went 7. And Miami is a good team, but they just anger you with their long offensive droughts, 7-8 minutes scoring 2 points. Okay, it's pretty easy to see how Golden State's like a step up in all of those things. Golden State's second best, defensive team in the regular season. Offense, obviously, this totally unique style that they played for years and years and years. That'll present new challenges. So one thing I like about the series is I don't think we learned at all. We haven't seen Golden State be tested in like a meaningful way. We don't know what they do when that happens this year's Golden State. And can Boston solve this like they've solved every other? Like they solved Giannis to a certain extent with no Middleton, like they solved the Miami offense, like they solved Brooklyn with Durant always catching the ball at the elbow and everything we were talking about in that series. Can they, take that problem solving ability and solve the toughest problem to solve, right? Like to me, that's the cool thing. It's that it does feel wide open. And you just mentioned you talked to people and they were like, I went on this show and they said this, I went on this show and they said the exact opposite. That's how I feel about the series. Like, I don't come down on one side or another right now, because I do think really evenly matched, easy case for both sides. Honestly, kind of an easy case maybe for both sides by multiple games, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. Now, that's the one that I'm like I do have some bets in this series for it to go a long time, but you can make that argument. Boston's injuries could completely derail the team. They could fall apart like a house of cards. Golden State, when they face Boston's defense, could find it completely unable to score and they could get stifled. And what if they don't get any of their injured players back? Okay, like that's a pretty easy case for both sides. So I'm like right down the middle here. It doesn't mean I don't have bets on the series or thoughts on the series, but I have heard a lot of both sides on this series, on this finals. And I feel like in most finals, that's not the case. It's usually everyone's kind of like, well, that's the best team. That's the best player. That's what makes this one so fun.
Yeah. And it's a great matchup too, because a lot of my cap has been based off of, if you told me, hey, you can pick any defense in the NBA to face the Warriors, specifically the Warriors, and
Sure.
how they play. I picked Boston because
Well, who would even be second? Like, who's even second in that?
Miami.
Miami, right?
Yeah, because of all the switch. Like that's the thing is nobody, you know, the Cavs never really had much success against them in the finals outside of 2016. And the one reason they did in 2016 was that was their best offensive year switching, because they really did challenge Curry on the switch with Tristan Thompson. As they were like, hey, you know, we got to guard back cuts. We got to guard threes. We can't let them get open on these things. We have to stay home. And we're just going to have to live with, if Steph beats Tristan off the dribble, that's fine. Tristan, you're going to have to basically just like stay up on him. And that's going to be a lot of this. One of the interesting things about this, though, is that a key component to Boston becoming what they've been defensively has been Robert Williams. And when I've watched the film and I've done the numbers, like Williams really struggles on switch. Like he's not that guy. He's their kind of alternative. He's their, hey, we can play drop with this guy. This is our like, he's our counter to what we normally do. Most teams, they run drop and then the switch is the counter. And this is the opposite, where Boston switches everything. And so on that end, like, but with the way they switch off ball, Boston's like the perfect team to defend Golden State. What's interesting is if you ask me, like, what's a perfect offense to counter Boston, it's also Golden State. It's like, we're going to do all this crazy off ball stuff. We're going to have split cuts and elevators and all these types of mechanisms to get guys loose and punish the switches. And there are some weak points on this team. So you mentioned that you have some bets in the market for it to go long. Do you like the over number of games? Is that like where you've been at in the series?
Yeah, I think, sometimes I'll go into the market on a series because I really think a team should be favored by more, or the price like should be different. Golden State first round against Denver, I felt like very strongly that like Golden State was very, 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 very certain to win that series. Not 100%, obviously, but like more than the market was implying. Curry's injury is part of like what made that series price weird. He was just coming back at that point. So that would be a situation where like I would go into the market with a strong opinion. Like, I think this team's going to win, and I think they're going to win by more often than the market implies. So I'm sort of like not originating that bet, but like I'm going in with that opinion. This is a series where I actually think I'm going to do, and for people who bet, I mean, kind of know this, but for people who casually bet, like you don't always have to go in with a strong opinion to make good bets. And what I mean by that is you can go in with the idea, like, what if the market price is really good? And you just assume that it's like perfect. Like, all right, let's say like this is the true representation of the difference between the teams right now. Then what you're doing is you're looking for numbers that exist kind of a little bit rogue, a little bit outside of those parameters. Okay, like let's say the consensus series price is something like, I don't know, what do we want to call it? 155, 135 or something like that. Whatever. We call it something in that zone, like 160, 140. Golden State minus 160, Celtics plus 140, of course. So what you can do is, okay, like, let's say I kind of like the Celtics. Okay, I can either shop Celtics best price, obviously, and just find the best price for that. Assume, some kind of averaging of everything is perfect. Take the roguest Celtics price. That's not really a word. Or you can even get, more rogue, and there's a Tatum finals MVP out there right now that's plus 175. So like, to me, I like that bet a lot. And I like that bet a lot because I kind of agree that the market price on the series should be about a certain way. And I really don't visualize a lot of Celtics winning outcomes in which the best player, which is Tatum by far, does not win the MVP of that series. Now that's my opinion, but like, that's where I'm coming into the market being like, all right, let's assume this is perfect. Now what's existing outside of this? And like, let's bet all those things and let's do some of that stuff. So you don't always have to go in with the idea that like, I have some crazy strong opinion on who's going to win the NBA finals. That's what I'm betting. It can more be like, no, I agree with this. Okay, so what is every sports book hanging that's kind of like 10 cents off here and 20 cents off here, and finals MVP is like a kind of a derivative of the Celtics winning the series. Just looking for those things in this series for me has been more fun. So, I mean, that Tatum finals MVP, I kind of already gave that one away. To answer your original question briefly, I'm playing the over on number of games. It is probably the thing I'm the most confident in because I am not confident in who will win the series. Over 5.5 has been minus 190 in a few places. There are two things I like about this that have, nothing to do really with like the math of the coming up with the point spreads in the games. One is Golden State has been brutal in closeout games so far this postseason. If we find ourselves, I don't think we're going to find ourselves in this, but if we did find ourselves in Golden State, closeout situation where like, 3-0 in Boston, they're going to lose that game to get the extra gate in game 5 and win at home. Like they're going to do that. So you at least get like the extra punt game out of that. Golden State in closeout games, like to really put away these series, they've lost all of them so far. They lost Denver game 4, they lost Memphis game 5 on the road, and they lost Dallas game 4. So like, they're at least going to extend the series a little more than you would like, probably. And then Boston has this really weird character flaw where they're really unable to play really, really soundly for more than like 6 quarters in a row. Like they just can't figure out a way to play.
Right.
Sometimes it's been 2 games in a row. A lot of times it hasn't been. They've had a really hard time being consistent, and that's what's caused a lot of the series that they played. They've had no trouble winning on the road. They've had no trouble playing well, but they've had a lot of trouble playing well a lot in a row consistently. So that's lent itself to long series for them as well. They've also never been in the finals before. I find it very unlikely they would like boot on the throat, put away a team like the Warriors in a small number of games with their personality type. So it's kind of like, okay, take those 2 things, put them together. That maybe doesn't tell me who's going to win, but it tells me long series. It tells me over 5.5 maybe happens a little bit more often than that. So I don't know who's going to win game 6, game 7 necessarily, but I feel really confident that we're going to get there more than in a lot of the other series that we've had in the playoffs.
Oh, that's such good stuff, Ken. That's just like that's awesome stuff. In terms of
well, you don't have to agree. Yeah, I mean,
no, I do though.
That's
the thing is, like
opinion.
when you start talking about about the derivatives of, okay, if we think that we think the market is accurately priced,
right?
And if we go beyond the parameters of it, that's where we can find the value. Like that's exceptionally sharp. Like that's how I think too, from the perspective of, and you kind of mentioned like the Boston's inconsistency, because obviously if I'm on Boston, which I am to start the series, and like some of this is hard for me when I do these shows, because like if you ask me like what are your finals bets, it's like, well, back in the like I got exact outcome prices back in the first and second round. So I have a +900 Celtics over Warriors and a +700 Warriors over Celtics. So like my best bet is I'm pretty good either way. That's my best bet. But when we're looking at this, like if I lean Celtics right now, then I don't believe it's like I have to kind of work backwards a little bit, which I don't usually like doing. But it's like, all right, if I like Celtics, do I think the Celtics can win the series if they go down 0-2? No. Like I don't think they can win 4.
Yeah, you don't think they can win down 0-2?
I don't think they can win 4 or 5 from Golden State. So I think they're getting one of the first 2. And Boston's been really great after losses. Like Brandon, my co-host, has been all over that like repeatedly. That's part of the
inconsistency thing. It's been like they're a zigzag. Everybody thinks the NBA playoffs are a zigzag betting strategy, and it almost never works. And Boston has actually been the zigzag betters. This is like their renaissance, basically. This is like, see, here's a team that actually like follows up good performances with bad performances, and Jaylen Brown follows up great performances with terrible performances, and they've actually been a team that's functioned that way more than almost any team I can remember.
Yeah, and so from that perspective, I'm probably gonna be on Boston in game 2. Like that's a game I've circled as like I like Boston in game 2. In game 3, I think is going to be fascinating because of that inconsistency thing you talked about. Like Boston doesn't follow up good performances with good performances. So if I think they're going to win game 2, do I think they're going to win game 3, or are they going to lose it like they did the Bucks series? Right. Like,
right.
Boston takes that game 2 in Boston. They go to Milwaukee, and, Milwaukee wins game 3, and everybody's like, oh, well, maybe Milwaukee's just better. They're up 2-1. And again, I just keep coming back to like, I am contractually obligated by my own contract to always mention that if Chris Middleton is healthy, the Bucks win that series. I will never, ever.
That's in there. It's like Article F. It's just like in there somewhere. All right,
yes.
great.
I will never,
That's
ever let that go.
Yeah.
I do think it's going to be interesting to bet the series as it comes. And the market for the finals is always really robust because it's obviously the last one. There's the most attention. So you can get things like after game 1, you can still bet outcome after 3 games. You can still bet the alternate series prices will still be up for those series at all of the books versus just Bet Rivers, which by the way is your show sponsor. Thanks to Bet Rivers for keeping those alternate win spreads up. That's been very good for us.
You get to shine on buckets too. That's good. All right.
Yeah, exactly. I'm here to help you out. And so I am going to be probably like, that's the thing is I'll see how game 1 goes, and we'll see how the matchups kind of play out. But part of it for me also, and I've talked about this on your show too, that trying to expect the tactical matchups is tricky, but we have I will say this series is going to be one where I will probably do that a little bit more because I have
do you think kind of like what to expect? Like both coaches are so smart. Well, if the Warriors get some of their players back, especially the depth on both teams, like the ability to play different combinations, is like tantalizing just as a basketball fan. Like, forget the betting aspect for a second. Like, I don't know what I'm going to see, but I feel like I'm going to see stuff that's really smart and where I'm going to be like, oh man, like that's a really cool adjustment. That's a really cool. Oh, they're going to play that 5-man combination. Like, is Robert Williams going to play a lot in this series? Like those kind of questions. Is Gary Payton II going to play a ton in this series? Like, that's also possible. Is Iguodala going to get deployed in any meaningful way? Just like, these are super interesting things. I don't know what they're going to. Ime Udoka and Steve Kerr are collectively like 1 billion times smarter than I am. So I'm definitely not trying to handicap the series like, what are the adjustments, or like how are they going to guard Curry? Who's going to guard Tatum for most of the series? I'm trying not to do that as much, only because it's like a healthy respect for the coaches, basically. Like Steve Nash is like the only one where I've been like, you know what? I bet they do the same thing. Like I bet they do that. This is like a series where I just go, yeah, you guys like paint your masterpieces. Like I got no idea, and I don't want to make an assumption and be wrong, but I feel like that'll happen more often than that I'll like nail it. So I'm curious, like obviously you watch more film. This is your area of expertise, where it's not my area of expertise. I'm curious if you feel like you have some aspects of this nailed from like an X's and O's standpoint.
Well, so here's what I think is interesting is I go the opposite way, which is you're like, they're both so smart. I'm like, yes, but a key part of that is they're also rational.
Okay.
And that's so like a big part of
you can predict what they're going to do, basically.
Right. Is that I don't feel like let's go to the obvious counterexample of this.
All right.
It's Doc, right?
Sure.
If you ask me like, well, who do you think knows more about basketball? I'm like, yes, Doc Rivers knows more about basketball. He played in the NBA. He's won an NBA championship.
Right.
He's a long-standing NBA coach. Like Doc's he's honestly a little underrated at this point because of how much everyone hammers him. However, Doc's also prideful, and you see it reflected in his press conferences, and you can literally see him being like stubbornly like, no, I'm not taking this guy off the floor. We're sticking to the game plan. It's gonna work. Almost as like a resistance to the criticism that's generated. Sure. And so versus Kerr, who I just feel like eventually will be like, yeah, no, we can't do this. Like, that's just not going to work in the series, whether it's, Kevon or if GP struggling after the injury, or even if it's something like, look, Jordan has done a great job for us, and he's been huge for us, but we can't keep him out of trouble. Like I've game planned in all the ways to help him on switches, to bring him help and still recover, and we're not able to do it. If that comes to that point, then if I can look at that and see that, then I expect Poole to be played off. What's interesting though is okay, so I'm on Boston, but when I get into, this is how I put it on the favorites, and I do think it's the best way to describe it. Boston has more guys in the series. I actually think that the Warriors can play off the court. Okay. The idea has been that, well, Golden State has more defensive liabilities, which is true, but the Warriors' level of execution is so high that if you look at things like how the Celtics do when Grant Williams is on switches, they're terrible. And the other thing is, all right, so like, how do you counter the switch from Boston? The easiest thing is to slip it. Okay. But Boston's really good slipping that, defending that slip. That's where they're great at. They're like, no, we're not gonna let you do that. But what you can do is you can pop with the slip, and that guy goes to the left. And then instead of that guy just spotting up, which is what the Celtics have faced in these playoffs, which they can figure out how to defend, you then run a dribble handoff with that guy. So Draymond slips, then you run a DHO, and now you've got Robert Williams or Grant Williams under a screen, not really good at coming out and defending those and calling them out. And that generates like Klay Thompson open off of the catch and shoot threes. And that's really dangerous. So there's all these situations. Robert Williams and Grant Williams, I think, are very high profile targets for Golden State to actually, for as big as those guys have been in the playoffs. I actually think those are guys that the Warriors can target on the perimeter. And their idea will be, if we can get those guys off the floor using the perimeter, then we can attack inside. Right.
Okay.
And so like all this kind of game plans out. And so that's part of this is, but the reason I come back to Boston is once you cut out all of the, not fat, but juicier bits, right? You get down just like the rock hard granite.
Okay.
The 7 guys.
I like how we were cutting a steak and then we got to like a mine. Somehow.
Yes,
we
exactly.
We're
just mixing metaphors all over.
Yeah, metaphors. Yeah.
Then you're basically Boston has like 7 guys that they can be like, nope, no matter what, we got these guys. Golden State, on the other hand, has more options, but all of them are like, it might work, it might not. It's a little bit unstable, and that's kind of how it plays in. I want to transition to Finals MVP.
Sure.
Because you mentioned Tatum, which I think is a great bet. I gave out on the pod that basically what I've done is I have 3 bets on Finals MVP. I have Klay Thompson, I have Al Horford at a huge number because I love the narrative play for Horford if he has a big series, and I have Tatum as the hedge. So if I think Boston's going to win, I think the most likely outcome is Tatum. I think Tatum's great value at plus. You can get him plus 175 right now at some books. I think there's good value there. I actually wonder though. I kind of a thought about this. If I'm going to have more value after game 1, which we'll talk about in a second, if there's better value later. When you're betting Finals MVP, let me ask you, just from a general perspective, what's been your approach in betting that as the series has gone on?
Well, I think, in the history of the award, I think we see 99% of the time, not 99%, majority of the time, best player on the best team. Like, don't overthink it whatsoever. There are situations where like a ancillary player, like a role player has won the award, or you have a Andre Iguodala is the one that everyone's thinking of right now. But Andre Iguodala is, like, make no mistake, he is absolutely the exception to how the award is handed out. And then you could have a really balanced team where they don't really have a best player. Those don't occur very often. Pistons would probably be the last one to do it. And I think Chauncey Billups won that Finals MVP, if I remember correctly, but it could be even wrong about that. But it doesn't matter. Like, there was not an expected winner of the award. Rip Hamilton could have won. Rasheed Wallace could have won. Ben Wallace could have, like, it wouldn't have mattered. And it would have still made sense for, like, best player on the best team. They didn't have a best player. So as long as you just kind of, like, understand that the award is so heavily weighted toward best player on the best team, you need something really crazy to happen for it to not be that. So I think in this series, I think there are arguments that it could be a little wacky. It's the Warriors. So you feel like, okay, a lot of attention is going to be on Steph Curry. That's why he hasn't won one of these yet. Now, granted, Kevin Durant won 2 of them, and he was sort of the best player on the best team, if you want to look at it like that. So it's not really like that was that weird. It's just, okay, like, Curry didn't win because there was a lot of attention on him. Could the same thing happen here, and who would benefit as a result of that? Sure, that's possible. And with Tatum, like, all right, could Jaylen Brown have an incredible series? And he would probably be the only. Horford's a little interesting because the price is outrageous. I think I've seen like 190 or 210 to 1 or something on him in a couple places. Like, that's just, want to take the lottery ticket? Great. And it might even be worth it. But just, like, from a reasonable handicap, okay, like, Jaylen Brown could really perform really well. But we kind of had that last series. Tatum still won conference finals MVP. He still got almost every vote. And that's about as well as Jaylen Brown's, like, ever going to play in a playoff series. And I think we had a preview of what that looks like, and Tatum still wins. So I think the interesting thing about finals MVP right now in the market is there is, if it was a player like Giannis or like Luka, like such an obvious, like, heliocentric guy on their team, you should see no difference between team to win the title and their finals MVP price, or it should be like 5 cents or something, like, very insignificant. Like, it really should be like almost 1-to-1, not quite, but almost 1-to-1. With these two teams, the market is pricing it like it's not 1-to-1, like, at all. Like, there's like a pretty reasonable gap between Warriors and Curry and between Celtics and Tatum. So the market is sort of saying, no, like, these guys are alive. Like, some of these guys could actually, win. It's not that crazy that it could happen. I think it would be really crazy, just to be honest. And any argument for a role player, my counter to that, like, if you want to say Klay Thompson or Jordan Poole or Jaylen Brown, my argument is like, right, but, like, if the team is going to win the championship, like that, and they have to win the championship to get this award, this team isn't winning without this player playing exceptionally. Like, Jaylen Brown can play better than Tatum in this series. That can absolutely happen. Might even happen, like, a good amount of the time. But the Warriors are winning those series. Like, they're not, like, that's that the Celtics don't win the title when that happens.
Right.
They need Tatum to play really well. Right. And same with the Warriors. Like, really, they're going to be like the best defense of the last 20 years with Curry no showing. Like, that's what's going to happen. And so there are some other markets, if people want the crazy price, but they don't want to, I would say don't play finals MVP if you want the crazy price. I do think it's Curry or Tatum a lot, just my opinion. There are some other markets that are in a lot of places. One of the best things about the finals, like you mentioned, so many markets open that would never be open for any other series just because it's the finals. You can bet, like, leading scorer of the series. Yeah. You can bet leading scorer of each team. You can bet stuff like that. And that's where I would be more likely to say, okay, could Jaylen Brown have more total points in this series than Jason Tatum? Sure. but Tatum might average, like Jaylen Brown might average 27, but Tatum averages 25, 9, and 8 and would 100% win finals MVP in that situation. We almost just had that in the last series that happened, basically. For the Warriors, like, you know, same basic thing. Like, could Jordan Poole average 26? Sure. And Curry's 25, 9, and 7 and still hits like the biggest shots of the series. Yeah, Curry's winning all the time in that situation. Yeah. It has to be a big difference between one of those players, I think, and the star for them to win. So I know like a lot to kind of chew on there, but finals MVP to me is always like an attractive lure to want to bet on a long shot. Like, it makes you like, well, like, what if this, and just the history of the award tells us that, like, I think you have to have a really, really, really good reason to feel like it's not going to be the best player on the best team. It doesn't mean it's certainly going to be, but the two players involved, Curry and Tatum, would be the only ones I'd be price shopping. Is a book hanging one that's way off from the team to win the series? You could really bet both if you were just aggressively price shopping these. Like, I think you could get right now, I bet you could get like Curry even and Tatum 175. And maybe you just bet both and create a new bet that's like, will the best player on the best team win the NBA Finals MVP? And obviously that would be like a pretty big minus wager. I'd have to I don't, off the top of my head, even in 175, I don't know what that equals, but maybe that's how you play it. I don't know who's going to win, but whoever wins, best player, and here are the rogue prices that I have on those two guys. Just another way to think about it.
So here's what I think is interesting, because I'm doing a big piece on how the award is voted on, which I always, you know, like, this is like my wheelhouse, is like, how does the NBA actually go about this? The voting panel has, like, I have a whole big breakdown of it. One thing I think that is interesting is you're going to have one of JVG or Mark Jackson. It's likely to be JVG. Mark Jackson was last year and they trade off. Okay. So it's probably going to be JVG. Right. And you're gonna have one of
hand down, man down. Was that who he voted for?
Exactly.
For Mama, there goes that man. Was my finals MVP. Yeah. So.
Your Kodak moment.
Well, yeah, that's right. Reggie's done. We don't get no more Reggie until next season.
True.
That's unfortunate. Yeah. So.
We're
gonna get what can Brown do for you? Just lock that in for game 3 in Boston. Going to break first quarter. Celtics get off to like a 10-4 lead. What can Brown do for you? Yeah. Go to the basket and score with authority. Celtics by 6. It's like, oh, God, please stop.
So you have one of Doris Burke and Hubie Brown, who are on the ESPN radio call. What's interesting there is you've got 3 coaches and a former player, and Doris is very sharp. And so, but what you have there is like, coaches are always going to reward like who actually impacted the game, like who actually like had the most impact on it.
Is this a Horford argument that's about to be made? Is that what this is about to be? Okay.
No, actually, my argument here is against Curry.
Okay.
Tatum is impossible to argue against. Like, if you're doing any Celtics betting, like, I would argue that no matter what you do, you should hedge with Tatum. You're getting a plus 175. Like, if you're betting Celtics, if you're like, I think the Celtics are going to win, I'm betting finals MVP, Tatum needs to be part of your betting outlook. Like, there is no argument for, I don't think Tatum's going to win. That doesn't make any sense. There's no scenario where I can think that makes sense. Curry, on the other hand, here's the problem. So if you look back, you said it's been the best player on the winning team.
Yeah.
The best player on the winning team is almost always the primary on-ball engine of that team.
And the Warriors don't function like that.
Warriors don't function like that. So if we look back, Giannis wins unanimously. Guess what? Giannis is the engine. Kevin Durant wins with the Warriors. Guess what? Kevin Durant's the engine. The Raptors are a little bit of a weird one in that Kawhi won. I wouldn't have necessarily said that Kawhi was the engine of that Raptors team. That's the one that's probably most in like your that leads most to your perspective of it, of just being like
best player, best
team, right? They won the series. They won it in 6.
And that was not that was not in dispute, by the way, that he was going to win that award. Like, that was
unanimous.
I had to be unanimous. I don't know for sure, but it had to be.
Yeah, there was nobody that was like, well, maybe it's. Oh no, I'm sorry, that's not true. Someone voted for Fred VanVleet that year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I looked at the votes. Fred VanVleet got 1 vote.
Okay. Was that Bontemps? Because he voted for Jimmy Butler for Eastern Conference Finals MVP.
Who was it?
Talk about overthinking it. God, I mean, the guy missed a half and no-showed 2 games. You can't give him Conference Finals MVP on a losing team. Like, it's going to take a little more than that for a guy on the losing team to win. Sorry.
I think it's interesting though, from the perspective of like, because we don't have, this is like a totally new award. I do kind of like the idea of like,
sure.
Like,
mystery.
We can have different standards for these types of things. I think that's like a interesting way of looking at it. I don't have it right. I've lost it. But anyway, yeah. So in general, these things are generally unanimous, and you're right that it's leaning that way. But I do think so. Here's kind of the question: if you look at the 5 Warriors' previous finals appearances, okay, 2015, Curry doesn't have a great series, and LeBron was such a monster, and that's why we get the Iguodala vote, right? So like
Right.
that's you could just say like that's a very particular situation. 2016 they lose. 2017 and 18 you have Durant,
Yep.
and so like Durant was just very clearly the best player. But in large part because when you have Kevin Durant, he's got to be the engine. That was always their tension, was between the Warriors wanted to play Warriors and Kevin Durant was like, no, like I'm Kevin Durant. We play Kevin Durant ball. And they couldn't, that's why that partnership didn't last. That's why they fought.
Still won a lot. Still won a lot of games.
Still won a lot. Still won 2 titles.
Yeah.
It
worked.
It worked, but they weren't happy with it. And I think that was partially why, right? So the question is, can you just go like, look, if you take out KD and you look at the rest of it, you don't have enough to definitively say like Steph Curry can't win finals MVP.
Okay.
On the other hand, I go like, you have 5 finals trips and Steph doesn't win any of them. 5 finals trips, 3 titles.
Right. Yeah.
And Steph doesn't win any of them, despite being like, I don't feel that Steph Curry doesn't get enough respect from the particular voters that are involved, whether it's because basically how it goes is, like I mentioned, one of JVG or Mark Jackson, one of Doris Burke and Hubie Brown. You're going to have 2 national reporters, probably Sam Amick, probably Mark Spears. He's been a consistent voter. You're going to have a beat writer from each team. So it's going to be Gary Washburn from the Boston Globe. It's going to be, I think, Connor Letourneau from the Chronicle, but it might go. This might be the year that they finally give the Athletic 2 votes.
Embarrassment of riches for like good reporters and good media. Like the NBA, like the one thing the NBA has a lot of, as much as I just like slandered Tim Bontemps Eastern Conference Finals MVP vote, like all the like NBA's got like an embarrassment of riches of people covering the league. So I'm confident the panel will be strong. Well, let me just like, what is this an argument for? I guess that's like what I'm trying to figure out. So like, all right, Curry, it's not Curry. It's actually somebody else. It's the engine. Okay, so like, what is the argument for them?
Yeah, so I think for me, it gets into, all right, I took Horford because I look at it and I go, if Horford has 2 amazing games that boost his points per game average, and you're able to go like, you know who's amazing in games 2 and game 6 or game 5, those turning points, the pivotal games of the series.
It's a memorable moment. It's like a big 3 that gives them the lead in like an important game.
And he has the narrative push. It's Horford. I am pushing back essentially against the idea, because this has been a big one, is that everyone's like, they're going to want to give it to Curry. And I steadfastly disagree with this notion that the voting panel is going to be like, we got to get Curry one. There will be one voter, maybe, that's like,
okay.
That's
you
like,
tell me who it is. Is there a voter you have in mind that's going to do that?
There's 2 I can see being like, we can't have Steph Curry not have a final.
You are like really in the weeds on this, by the way. You're going into like voter preferences and stuff. Like, well, I think this writer likes that. We haven't even played a game yet. You think that they're not going to want to get
because here's the thing is like, on some level, it's not, the games are always going to be different than we think that they're going to be. There's that certain level of uncertainty. The reason I want to get into this idea is, like it is with regular season MVP, I know who the beat writers are going to go for. I know when the awards came out for this year, when the vote block came out, I was able to predict, like, I bet this person voted Embiid. Yep. I bet this person voted Embiid. Yep. I bet this person voted Jokic. Like, and if you break it down to the blocks, it's kind of the same. And so what you have here, I think with the finals MVP is of a very certain type. And I do think that those lean less towards easy answers. Not that they're against it, just that they're not going to be like, well, it's Curry. The Warriors won, so it's Curry. That's where like a lot of people, I feel like the conversation is. And that's why I have a hard time getting there versus like, look, if Klay Thompson has 2 30-point games, which is entirely possible in the series, and the Warriors win, like Klay Thompson is absolutely on the table, because Klay Thompson's highs are very high right now and his lows are very low right now. But if you have both, the average is going to be high enough when they look at the series stats, which they will briefly. I think there's value on that. Like, that's where I'm at on finals MVP is I can't get to a Curry vote. If you ask me, like, is there any way he wins? Absolutely. Like, if the Celtics, I'll tell you this, if you think the Warriors are going to win, you should be betting like Warriors -2.5 on the win spread line, because that means the Boston Celtics can't ably defend Steph Curry, which they have been great at throughout their matchups over time. Does that make sense?
It does. So here's the there's two things. There's like the X's and O's, like they're going to take Curry away. That seems like a pretty good reason to bet on not Steph Curry to win Finals MVP. That's like an analytical argument. The voting argument, I guess, like my first counter to that would be, couldn't I have said all of those things about like Western Conference Finals MVP, and then but he like easily won that award? So like, isn't it the same? Like he wasn't the engine of the Western Conference Finals, but like Andrew Wiggins would have won like in that situation probably, right? If you had like a really deep analytical take on like who affected the game because of all these things that happened. So like, all right, like it seems like we just had that and Curry won. So if we had it and he won, why can't the exact same thing happen? Like, is this so fundamentally different in terms of how this is going to play out that we can't just have the same thing happen again? I guess that's like where I would start.
Yeah, I think my counter would just be, I think the Mavericks defense was adorable in that it's like, oh, look at us, we switch on ball, and the Celtics defense is like, we switch everything. You want to run us through five screens? So it really isn't
voting. It's more like how you think the Celtics are going to defend. Like that's probably why you like Boston too.
Yeah.
So
I'll say this: it's not just us. It's not just the voting. It's a combination of the two. It's like, look, if the team was not well built to defend Curry, then I'd be like, look, Steph's going to have shots in the series. He's going to have lots of shots.
Okay.
And he's the best shooter of all time. I lean that way.
So who is the Warrior you would settle on? Like, because I mean, like that was a pretty impassioned argument for like, and a lot of information about voting. So if it is not Curry, like you like Boston and you think Tatum maybe is going to win Finals MVP, or Horford, and you think Boston's going to defend the Warriors really well, like those are all pro Boston things.
Yes.
But that's not really the argument about if that Curry can't, or not Curry can't win. Curry is less likely to win if the Warriors win. So like who is I'm sure people are wondering this right now, we're listening, like who is the Warrior that you would bet on then at the price because of this argument about Curry?
I bet Clay. I think Clay's a great bet.
Okay.
I think Clay has great value. I think Jordan Poole's worth a shot just because if Boston's not able to target him off the floor, then I think Poole's the guy that's going to benefit the most from breakdowns and coverage.
Okay.
But this kind of question I ask is like, when there's a breakdown, who's going to be open? Who's going to have a guy closing out like late that he's going to be able to pump fake and beat to the rim? To me, it gets to Poole. It gets to Thompson. Those are the guys that I think because I think Boston's entire defensive scheme will be, nope, not Curry. Like we'll lose a million different ways. We're not losing Steph Curry. I think Andrew Wiggins, honestly, is like not and I know that we're getting into like the long shots, and I think your line of thought is very sound, right? Like it makes me like reconsider these things of, yeah, it's like a market that wants you to bet on these long shots, but it's almost always best player.
Like, is it worth overthinking it to this? Right. Like, you know what I mean? It's just, is it worth
that's
it?
My brand,
Super Bowl MVP.
That's who I am. That's my brand is overthinking.
Finals MVP. Like, it's just like, that's the one I never want to overthink. I feel like Super Bowl MVP, they play one game. The Super Bowl is littered with MVPs who have like not even gone off to have successful careers later, or were like very ancillary players like coming into the game. And so, all right, cool. Like that makes a ton of sense. Like, yeah, let's get crazy if the game calls for it. Even like I haven't done a ton on World Series MVP, but I'm pretty sure like within the context of one baseball series, any singular hitter on especially a team that's balanced could, like, what if the guy hits 3 home runs, or like what if that happens? Like, all right, cool. It just seems more random. Yeah. This one to me is just like, I just look at all the past winners and I just go, is it really worth me putting in my money on something that's like this list tells me is so unlikely to happen? And if the price isn't outrageous, you know, right. Like, yeah, there's always a price point. If Clay is 100-1, should you bet him to win Finals MVP?
There's value.
Well, then yes. Yeah. Well, then yes. Value. Now I would be interested, but it's never going to work like that. It's never going to be what you want. Maybe that's the Horford argument, is that he is in that range and he fits that description. I don't know if I buy that. It's an interesting argument because the price. Now you're speaking my language. The price is crazy, but yeah, it's like best player, best team. I think I'd just rather stack Curry and Tatum off market stuff if I can find it and roll the dice. And I don't know who's going to win the series. I think that's how I would rather approach. And it'll go a long time. That's like about the only other argument I can make.
So before I get you out of here, do you have a game one lean? Do you have a game one bet? Do you have a game one side? Do you have a game one prop? Do you have anything? Do you have any? I know that you guys will do the show Thursday and have like final bets on it. But where do you for game one, Warriors -3.5? What do you like in game one?
Well, I'm curious if you've heard the same sell that I've heard from many people. I mean, I haven't talked to anybody who's on Boston in game one. Mm-hmm. Everybody I've talked to is on the Warriors because of how the previous series have gone for both teams, right? The Warriors get off to really good starts. The Celtics I don't think I've covered any of the 3 game ones that they played. I think Tatum had made the layup against Brooklyn, so they didn't cover that game. They were a bigger favorite than that. Game 1 Milwaukee, they lost. That was that early Sunday start where they got like just completely discombobulated. And that was at home. And then did they lose? They lost Game 1 Miami too. Yeah, they lost Game 1 Miami because that was the teams off Game 7s. Both played terribly in the following series. So Boston's 0-3 has not played really well. At the same time, there's a pretty long time off between series. So like, is what happened in those 3 games representative of like what we're going to get here? Like lean Warriors, I guess, but I don't know if there's enough like meat in that form of analysis for me to like put money in play on the series. I think it's really like, I got to just watch it once to just see like how these pieces fit together. Like, what is this? They played, very little in the regular season. Players who were not on the team anymore were involved in a lot of those games or absent. Star players were absent. Okay, like they played really well against the Warriors historically. Does any of that matter? It's a different coach for the Celtics. Probably not. Durant was also on some of those teams. Like, okay, so I can't really use that. So little to go on. I kind of just want to see it once and then be like, okay, like I at least see how the pieces fit together. Like, I'll be honest, like I watched Boston play Miami, and within the first 2 games of that series, it was not a question in my mind that Boston was better. Now they might not win, but I was like, well, Boston is better. Like that. And that was probably obvious to some people before the series, but like, I don't know. For me, it's like, sometimes you just see it and you just go, okay, like I see how the pieces fit together here. It's hard for me to like project in my brain what this is going to look like. Both teams are really smart. There might have ended up being the 2 best teams in the league, really, when we get to the end of the season. Phoenix and Milwaukee will have their say about that too. But like, I just kind of want to see the pieces fit together. There's so many moving parts. There's so much balance. There's so many injuries. Do we know if Robert Williams is even available for Game 1? Yeah. Do we know what percentage Smart's going to be in the game, or will he finish the series? That seems like that's in doubt. Just kind of see it once, and then game to game. Just if I have a minute here, just to give one last piece of betting advice to people, it would just be like, all of these markets are open for this series, and they're not open in any other series. Like, you can bet leading scorer in the series. You can never bet that in any other series. Who would even open such a thing? Leading rebounder, most assists, scoring averages for players, all this kind of stuff. Okay, this is a series that has like 7 injured players in it. And this actually seems exactly like Warriors. This is like if Warriors Raptors happened this year, it would be the same piece of advice, where it's like the markets are all open, yet we don't know who's playing. So here's a thought, like if Marcus Smart is ever out, or like someone's ever out and it's unexpected, Jason Tatum's neck impingement strikes again or whatever. I mean, everyone's playing it with an injury right now. Okay, the side market, the total market everywhere, like that gets wiped within like 60 seconds of that Shams tweet, right? It's just like, no shot. Everyone's rushing. Maybe you get a bet and maybe you don't. Probably don't. And like, you got nothing to go off of. But like, think about the ripple effect through all these. Like, I have been on sites that keep some of the stupidest fringe markets open in these situations. And it's like, yeah, there's an effect on like Smart missing a game to these other guys going over their threes or their scoring averages going up in this, whatever. Like, just be thinking about the ripple effects of all the injuries that are going to happen in the series, just like they've happened in the last couple of series. And there's like a lot of stuff that matters or is affected, even if it's in not a one-to-one way, has some, residue on it from a guy not playing. And this seems like a series where we might have a lot of guys not playing. It's at least possible. It's been a playoffs where we haven't had a lot of guys play. Just like, keep that in mind. Books sometimes will keep stuff up that they shouldn't. Will close things down, keep other things open. There seems to be no rhyme or reason to it sometimes because there isn't. Just be mindful of that. And sometimes the valuable bets can just come very easily from that, as opposed to having to be like a super genius about how the coaches are going to impact the game.
That's awesome. That's great stuff from Ken Barkley. You can find him on You Better You Bet daily on the BetQL network. You can find him on the Aussie app. You can find him on Twitter at Lockie Lockerson. Ken, thanks so much for coming on.
Sounds good, Matt. Thanks. I'll see you on You Better You Bet later today, I think. Hopefully.
Yes, indeed.
Sounds good.
You and I will just rehash this entire conversation, and I'll try and make it peppy for radio. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have yourselves a great week. We will be back with you after Game 1 of the NBA Finals. We'll have breakdowns and preview for Game 2. Thanks for joining us. Let's get buckets.